I'm Cindy Kenisher, the Executive Director of the PACE Women's Justice Center. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar, Emojis in the Context of Domestic Violence. I think we're all really excited to hear our panelists today by virtue of the fact that we have so many people with us. And I actually had a friend, a colleague come up recently who said, I saw the upcoming webinar and I'm so excited. I saw the name and I thought that one I have to listen to. So in this world where interpersonal communication has been increasingly influenced by technology and written messages can be so easily captured and made permanent, I think we can all imagine that common images such as emojis can have incredible significance in our contemporary communication. At the Women's Justice Center, where we represent victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and elder abuse, we understand from our clients how technology and the various ways that people communicate today have added to the types of abuse that our clients suffer. Today's program, inspired by Professor Leslie Garfield Tenzer's and Ashley Kangro's law review article, An Emoji Legal Dictionary, will address important legal and practical considerations around the complexities associated with emojis, including how might survivors and victims use emojis or other digital signals to convey the need for help, or how do courts interpret or evaluate emojis in the context of intimate relationships characterized by emotional or physical abuse, and even how can support networks popularize emojis in order to increase awareness of intimate partner violence and support those who have experienced it. Our panelists today are our host, Professor Leslie Garfield Tenzer, as well as co-author, law student, and future ADA, Ashley Kangro, as well as Corinne Ba Tahe, founder and CEO of Blue Devil, Diversity and Inclusion Training, and also PACE Women's Justice Center's Susan Carroll, our Director of Outreach and Training. Thank you so much, Leslie, Ashley, Corinne, and Susan for joining us today. Before I turn the discussion over to Professor Tenzer, I have a couple of reminders. As you saw on the opening slides, we're recording this presentation, so please make sure to mute yourself and keep so we can keep the background noise down. Please forward any questions through the chat to the webinar hosts, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. We'll be doing the Q&A at the end of the panel. I also want to let you know that all registered participants will receive a follow-up email with links to PWJC information, as well as our panelists' articles. Lastly, I want to say that we are very grateful for the support of Sterling National Bank, who is sponsoring today's webinar. So now I'd like to introduce our host, Professor Leslie Tenzer, Luke Cummings Faculty Scholar and Professor of Law at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University in White Plains, where she teaches criminal, tort, contract, and social media law. She is also the host producer of Law to Fact podcast. And in addition to her regular teaching at Pace Law School, Professor Tenzer regularly lectures nationally on issues relating to social media and contract law, and is a motivational speaker for students interested in the study of law. She is a student of improv and had a featured role in the 2018 movie Larchmont. Thank you, Leslie, Ashley, Corinne, and Susan for joining us today. And now I'll turn it over to Professor Tenzer.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello, and welcome to our discussion on emojis in the context of domestic violence. I'm excited to say that over 100 people are joining us today, which belies the fact that the emoji communication is becoming increasingly relevant to the domestic violence conversation. Today's discussion came about, as Cindy mentioned, in response to research that Ashley Kangro and I performed on emojis. Our goal was to identify the dual and even sometimes triple meanings of emojis. At the time when we began, I thought we'll find an eggplant and that's going to mean penis, or maybe a snowflake will make cocaine. But I was shocked to learn that even the most innocuous of emojis can have meanings that can threaten victims of domestic violence or others used to intimidate when they receive the text. We'll explore some of these in a moment. After we do, we will be thrilled to hear from Karine Batahay, who will share her vision for using emojis to help domestic violence victims. We'll hear from Susan Carroll, an attorney with the Pace Women's Justice Center, who will discuss emojis as evidence. And finally, as Cindy mentioned, Ashley will share her findings, or our findings, I should say, regarding emoji use. We'll end our program again, as you know, with questions and answers. Before we begin, though, I want to thank the Pace Women's Justice Center, and in particular, Cindy Kanisher, the Executive Director, Jenna Cosberg, the Director of Development and Community Outreach, who worked with us to plan this event, Rachel Silva, our Director of Communications, and Patty D'Agostino, who is the single most organized person I've ever met, and the Manager of Development and Marketing at PWJC, and she worked to ensure that today runs smoothly. Let's begin, though, by asking you some questions about your emoji literacy. So we're going to put up some emojis and ask you what you think they mean. All right, so here's the first emoji. And the question is, do you think that this emoji means either human trafficking or great job, you're moving up? And I think you should be able to vote, right? I'm not sure. I thought you would be able to vote. But it does not. Oh, vote. Here you go. All right. So everyone who is on the webinar, why don't you vote and see if you think this means a bumper sticker for human trafficking or a great job, you're moving up. All right, I'm going to vote, but others can vote too. Submit your answers. All right, Patty, are we going to show the responses? Here we go. All right, so 76% of you thought that it meant almost like a bumper sticker for human trafficking, and 24% meant great job, you're moving up. And the answer is yes, you are both correct. It may mean that when you're in the workplace, you're making more money, but in fact, this also can mean that it is a bumper sticker for human trafficking. And in a California case, People versus Jamison, the court found that this is such a common meme that it has really become something that people are quite familiar with. The idea is that prostitutes wear high-heeled fancy shoes, and the money is meant to mean that you're coming to me to make some more money. Let's look at the next one. What do you think down for your crown means? Your choices are going to appear in a second. And it doesn't mean I'm loyal to you, or is it specific to commercial sexual exploitation? We'll just get the response in just a minute. All right, so it's a tie. Yes, it means loyal, but basically this is really a reference to commercial exploitation. The crown is known quite well to represent a pimp. And so anytime in courts that there is an emoji, an evidence emoji, or emoji, I should say, submitted as evidence when you're concerned with sexual trafficking or any kind of sexual exploitation, courts have become quite comfortable with recognizing that the crown actually means sexual exploitation referenced through the use or the events of a pimp. All right, I think we have one more for you. Okay, what about this? We have some feet and some money. Do you think this means a prostitute earning money or walking to the bank? All right, we'll get that up there in just a second. A tie again, but actually this one does mean, in fact, that it's called 10 toes down, and it is a coded reference for prostitution. So this also can mean prostitution. The idea is that a prostitute or someone, who gets money in exchange for sex is working to the bank with their money. So that also, a court has held, has been considered prostitution in a case dealing with sexual exploitation. So you see, things that become quite familiar to you really can mean different things. I mean, crown can be as innocuous as meaning royal, but it can also represent a pimp. We have one last question for you, and this question is whether you think a universal emoji to signify domestic abuse would be helpful. So let's see where we go with that one. And we'll get our findings in just a second. And the answer is close to almost unanimously yes. And that is what our first speaker is going to talk about today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you today, Karine Ba-Taheh. Ms. Ba-Taheh is the founder and CEO of Blue Level, an international diversity, equity, and inclusion training and consulting company. She has over 10 years of experience in international journalism and training and development. She's worked and lived in the United States, Canada, Brazil, Switzerland, Sweden, Germany, India, and Australia, and holds a Bachelor of Commerce from Concordia College, certificates in diversity and inclusion and strategic human resource leadership from Cornell University, and an executive program certificate in human resources from Stanford University. She is coming to us from California a little earlier for her, but thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. Hi, everyone. So all of those emojis I was looking at, I'm like, wow, like I'm just thinking about, as a parent, how much it would be important for a parent to know what those means for their children. So anyways, I'm here. I'm the CEO of Blue Level Training, and we do diversity, equity, and inclusion training globally. But I actually got contacted by Ashley, who, talked to me about this event that they were doing and at her research and what she was working on with Professor Leslie. And she saw one of an article that I had posted 2 years ago regarding the use of emoji in order to help victims of domestic violence. So I'll kind of bring you into the why and what is the proposal that I have given with that, to use an emoji that would represent domestic violence so that we can have this quick communication with our loved ones. So it was beginning of April 2020, and I was sitting in my kitchen with my boyfriend, and yes, I felt stuck a little bit because we could not go outside much and so forth because the pandemic had started. But I felt so safe and happy and grateful to be there with him. And it made me realize how unbearable it would have been if that happened just like a few years ago when I was in a domestic, violent relationship with my ex-boyfriend, and also even as a child where I was in a violent household. So it starts there, right? Because I think your childhood really, really is something that shapes you and is something that you can never forget. So I even, if we're talking about, domestic violence for couples, I want to talk about childhood as well. So as a kid, I was in a violent household, and it was really bad. And I hated summer vacation because then that meant that I had to go home, and then I was going to be stuck at home where the violence is. So I always loved school, but the more I think about it, what I really loved was that it was safe and I had a support system that was there with me. And during those times, I never talked to my other parents about the violence that was going on, because I was so scared that my words were going to be incriminated, by the person that was violent in my household. So I didn't want to be accused of telling on that person. I didn't want to use words. I just wanted people to read my mind, basically, so that they could come and help us. One time I was so scared that I ran away from home and I went to hide in a restaurant, but I asked them to please hide me in their kitchen with the cooks, because I'm too scared. I needed to hide. And I was just thinking, with COVID, there was no restaurant open, and it was just much harder for everyone to hide. So then I went into I had some relationship, and one of them was really abusive. And then I was in Europe, and I was isolated from my support system. And my boyfriend at the time had an amazing reputation. Like, he was the most nice, loving, caring, funny person, like that. It was unbelievable. But then when it was just together, he was violent, and there was different types of abuse. And but the thing is, I was in Europe, and when he would be violent with me on the street, people did not stop. I would ask people for help, and they would not stop. So it made me lose faith in even being able to be helped by people that did not know me. And then when his friends saw me being hurt, they did not do anything as well. So, my loved ones were in Canada, and so I did not get any support. So all of this, I did not think also about calling a domestic violence hotline. I was in Europe. I was in my early 20s. And I think that, you're always told that it's you, it's your fault that you make them react like that. So it's, I don't think that it comes really fast that you're, okay, I'm a victim of domestic violence, and therefore I should call that number. Plus, calling that number, finding that number, and the whole process looked so complicated, so complex for me, that I didn't even think about doing it. And then when I went to the police, they say, show me your bruises. I did not take picture of my bruises because I didn't want my boyfriend at the time to see those. So I just felt stuck. And the more I was thinking about it, when it was April 2020, the more I was like, it must be 10,000 times harder right now during COVID. And so what should I was trying to think about a solution, maybe using something that was super, super innocent, but that could help. And so I thought about using the frog emoji. And the frog emoji would be something that you would send to your loved ones. And there would be two ways of using it. One frog would mean that I'm not safe. I'm actually a victim of domestic violence. Please check on me, whether it is FaceTiming, coming to drop groceries, or just interrupting what's going on, right? Because you need sometimes distraction for the whole thing to calm down. And then if I would send two frogs emojis, that would mean my life is in danger. Please call the police. And so the police would come and check on you. So why are we using the frog? It's super innocent. And as you know, when I was a kid, I wanted people to read my mind. I was too scared to explain. It takes too much time to explain. Sometimes you don't have the strength, so you're too scared, and it takes time. So just having one frog, which also looks super innocent, because when you're in a abusive relationship, normally your partner looks at your phone, looks at your emails, looks at everything. It's coercive control. And I feel like a frog is not something you can put this inside a sentence. It's rare that we use frogs for most of us, I think, anyways, at my age. We don't really use the frog emoji a lot. But if it was to be there in an email or in a text, it looks very innocent. and it doesn't make you feel like, oh, you can get caught, that you told on your abuser. So for me, that was really a benefit of the frog. Also, it's quick, and you send it to people. If you're where there's people that know you, they know your address, they can send the police. And it wouldn't be like asking a stranger who could be scared of your partner, just like my experience, or strangers that don't even believe you or don't care about you. You're actually sending this to someone who cares about you and could react. So there's also another signal for help that I think most of you might have heard of. It's this signal like this, right? That was used. It comes from the Canadian Women's Foundation. It was announced in, I think, April 2020 as well. It has been used just recently. A person in Kentucky saw a woman that was a passenger in a car. I think she had been kidnapped, but they called the police and they saved her. So that's really great. I think it's amazing. And I think that the frog complements this. We're using an emoji. Like I said, strangers, in my experience, it did not work. And I have another friend who had been kidnapped, and there's a stranger, they just locked their doors and they did not want to come help, right? So of course, I think it's complementary. It's if you have a phone and if you are close to people that know you, that could help you, but it happens often. So I don't think we should ignore that possibility. And then finally, I just wanted to say that I'm extremely grateful for Ashley for your work, and then Leslie also for your amazing work, and for the Pace Women's Justice Center for doing this event and turning emojis in powerful tools. Of course, to be able to, for us to recognize what they mean, so we can support victims of domestic violence and use it in justice court to prove things. I also think that we could use it as a positive, as a tool for communication. And I hope that people that think that could help them would use it. I know that if I was me as a kid and as a woman stuck in an abusive relationship, I would have used it 1000%. So that's it. Thank you.
Corinne, thank you so much for those amazing words. You actually hit the nail on the head, which was what I was going to say. We've spent so much time focusing and worrying about all the negative connotations of emojis, and you're actually using emojis for good. So we have enough people here that we can get the ball moving for your frog initiative, which I think is just fascinating and brilliant, and we appreciate the work you've done and you joining us. So our next presenter is Susan Carroll. Susan has worked with the Pace Women's Justice Center since 2007 and has been Director of Training, Outreach, and Education since 2015. Through her outreach and training programs, Susan raises awareness, shares information, and trains judges, police officers, attorneys, social service providers, law students, and the community in domestic violence, sexual assault, and elder abuse issues. Before joining the Pace Women's Justice Center, Carroll worked with Bronx District Attorney's Office for 10 years, handling a wide mix of felonies, including homicides, assaults, sexual assault cases, and other cases, including domestic violence-related offenses. She's a graduate of Boston College and Boston College Law, and she's going to give us kind of a boots on the ground perspective. So Susan, take it away.
Thank you, Professor Tenzer. And thank you everyone who joined us this afternoon. I know we're all so happy that you tuned in for this. I wanted to start off by just giving an overall sense of how changes in technology have affected the abuse our clients receive over the course of the last 20 years. Not so long ago, and certainly in my lifetime, people didn't have cell phones, and many didn't have access to computers at home. And really, in the early 90s, there wasn't social media, right? People weren't carrying around these devices. People were dialing in, frankly. So power and control through communication consisted of phone conversations, snail mail, email, and of course, always in addition to in-person emotional, physical, verbal, and sexual abuse. Changes in technology have changed how we live. So from a Pew Research study in April of 2021, 97% of Americans now own a cell phone of some kind, and 85% of those phones are smartphones. That's up from 35% in 2011. And more than 3/4 of us now own a laptop or desktop computer at home and have access to that all the time, not just when we're at our jobs. And over half of us own a laptop or rather an iPad or tablet of some sort. So that's changed how we communicate in abusive situations and in loving ones. 7 in 10 Americans now use social media to connect with one another. Back in 2005, only 5% of Americans did. And in 2011, it was only half. Young adults, as we know, and certainly I'm sure some of the law students on this webinar can attest to, they're prolific users of social media. Now, they may not be on Facebook to the same level that middle-aged or older Americans are, but they're using Instagram and TikTok and Yik Yak and Snapchat. And LinkedIn is cutting across all ages. Certainly everyone here on this call, I would imagine, either has a LinkedIn profile or is setting one up. So social media is a big part of most Americans' daily life. And most Americans, 7 out of 10 Facebook users use it every day, and 6 in 10 Instagram and Snapchat users access their sites every day. And as a parent of 2 teenage daughters, I can tell you it's more than once a day in my house. In terms of texting, which is how this great law review article and the use of emojis came about in the research by Professor Tenzer and Ashley, Americans text twice as much as they call. Over 6 billion texts are sent every day, 180 billion each month, and 97% of Americans text weekly. Again, no surprise, 18 to 24-year-old adults, very prolific in their use of text, over 128 texts per day. 95% of these texts are read within 3 minutes of being sent, and the average adult spends over 23 hours a week texting. As we know from the great law review article, Professor Tenzer and Ashley wrote, 95% of the online population, as part of this texting, sends over 10 billion emojis each day. So thinking of that use of both our cell phones and social media, I'm sure you all can see how that's changed how our clients experience abuse. Abusers use this technology to stalk, harass, and even impersonate our clients and those closest to them for power and control. This type of abuse includes sharing embarrassing or crude content, the use of intimate images without permission, think about sexting or revenge porn, doxing someone by releasing private information on the internet, stalking, and we know that stalking through electronic devices and social media is rampant. 70% of individuals stalked online are women, and more than 80% of the stalkers are male, according to a DOJ study. But I want to put an asterisk to that because we also know that intimate partner violence cuts across all populations. But statistically, some of our populations, such as LGBTQ folks, are less likely to report these offenses to civil attorneys or to law enforcement. And we know all the reasons why, right? Why some populations may feel that that's not an avenue, unfortunately, for support and for their benefit. So with that in mind, I would say, let's take a caution to that stat and realize there are far more people who are suffering this type of abuse than ever reported. Online abuse also includes electronic surveillance, threats, identity theft, and impersonation. Social media abuse can include changes to someone's Facebook status by using their passwords or any knowledge they have to update information, to share embarrassing content and images, and to contact friends and family through social media platforms with abusive messages, with hurtful personal information. And certainly, as we know from Professor Tenzer and Ms. Carroll and their review of 100 cases, the courts, like our attorneys here, are seeing this abuse and seeing the use of these emojis as part of any civil or criminal matter, as something we need to investigate and really have a good sense of to help our clients. The first thing I would say we do here at PACE, and I'm sure for all the attorneys on the call and budding attorney law students as well, context is key. The use of any form of communication in an abusive domestic violence situation depends on context. It's like our stalking cases. You know, if you left a rose out someone's door or on their car that may be seen by one person to have a loving gesture, if you're in the midst of an abusive breakup, that could be the sign that you're being watched by your ex-boyfriend or partner, and that they are leaving that rose to let you know that they are still a part of your life, whether you want it or not, and they have eyes on you. So the first thing we try to do here at the Pace Women's Justice Center is really get a full picture of the client's current situation. We really want to know everything we can. And I know, and I caution again, this takes time, right? When people are going through some of the worst things in their lives, it's going to take a while potentially to open up to a stranger. This is not things we normally share. And these types of crime, these intimate partner violence crimes, are so different than any other type of crime, which is why we've had the history in the US and in other countries as well, as not treating these as a crime in the past in the way that we should, seeing it as a more personal or family matter. But we know now, thankfully, that we really have to treat these for the crimes that they are. So we first try to build a relationship with the client and get a real sense of what's going on. And that will include the first, last, and worst incidents that have happened in their life. But we know what people tell us as the first, last, and worst may not be, when we review the information with them, really the whole picture, or maybe even the worst thing that they've suffered. So we want to talk about their methods of interaction, and we want a full sense of how these clients communicate. So that involves a review of text messages, social media platforms, whether they share passwords or accounts in, for example, like a family account on a Verizon plan, and how they have access to each other's passwords, and because that's a real concern both for stalking and for disseminating information in a harmful and abusive way through power and control. We also are very concerned about, as I said, this is a form of stalking, and with the onslaught of electronic devices and the way we communicate, right? We're all never without our phones. Well, we all know too, our phones have various apps and ways to download tracking information on them. Something as simple as, sharing my location, which can seem very benign, to installing something on a device that is not visible to the device holder, but will track their every move. We know too that because of social media, that people are interacting even when they don't want to interact, right? If they're not careful with how they set their privacy settings, or even if they've tried to adjust them in the midst of a breakup, an abusive breakup, their abusive partner may still, through the knowledge of their passwords, have the ability to access that account and to change information or to share abusive or hurtful images. We also know too that a few minutes with someone's laptop, not even a few minutes, frankly, I should rephrase that, less than a minute, if you have access to someone's personal laptop or their phone, as I said, again, you can put a tracking application on that will allow you to see every keystroke, every message in real time, and will not be visible to the device holder, the owner of that phone or laptop. So when we're speaking to our clients, we are looking at all these communications, and we're certainly looking at the emojis as well, because as the courts are struggling with whether, as we saw at the start, whether shoes and money are just great job, you're moving up at your position in the office, or they mean more, the courts are the same way. And frankly, for our clients, the history is everything. So they may come in and want to show us one or two text messages, but it's very important as attorneys to get the full picture, both in terms of deciding how we're going to help our clients use this evidence before a fact finder to prove the offenses, whether it's in a civil proceeding or helping them here at Pace Women's Justice Center. We also act as liaison with our terrific partners at the Westchester DA's office and in law enforcement to help further evidence gathering in conjunction with our client and with their explicit permission to help them build a case if they are choosing to do so in a criminal platform, or if they've already engaged by calling the police and there's an open matter before our county DA. So we realize that having the full history of these conversations and the use of emojis or the use of certain phrases is incredibly important to prove how the coercive control has existed and what elements exist in that relationship. And I just want to mention as well, our clients never suffer one form of abuse. When they come to our offices, male, female, teenagers, LGBTQ individuals, they may come identifying one specific issue that they want assistance with, but as their trust in us grows and as we have the ability to have a deeper conversation with them and refer them to our partners in DV advocacy, we generally learn that there's a lot more going on than our clients had identified, and that they may come in and identify one form of abuse. They're here for an assault, they're here for an obstruction of breathing, or they think it's harassment. But when we go on, we identify stalking and other crimes, crimes involving sexual abuse as well. So there's so many ways in which abusers exert coercion and control in addition to, and it's visible in in their communication methods once you take the time to do that full intake with your client. I would say in terms of documentation, we are very concerned about making sure our clients preserve them. Now, I heard Karina talk about how she felt it wasn't safe to take pictures of the bruise, and I understand that, but the benefit of if we have the ability to connect with a client and connect them with our advocacy partners is to let them know that their pictures, these pictures, even if they're choosing not to use them at this time, if they can take them and immediately send them to a friend or a family member and delete them from their phone, are amazing evidence. Because the reality is, even if you call the police and they respond that night, a bruise takes time to develop. So if I attempt to obstruct the breathing of my intimate partner, that first night when the police respond, they might see a red mark here. 2 days, or they may see nothing, frankly. But a day or two later, a bruise may develop. 3 days or 4 days after that, it's in full bloom, and 5 days later, it's gone. So we caution and remind our clients that they can be their best investigator, and that this information and evidence will have value, even if they choose not to use it in the moment, that it can have value because we are always providing it context, much like this emoji context, to our judges and jurors, that this is a history of abuse. This is not a one-off incident. In terms of documenting, we do tell our clients if they're going to take a screenshot that we have to have the whole image, including the name and the time. And we want them to be careful to display the phone number of the person sending the message. In terms of introducing it, it's relevance and authentication. The good news about the authentication piece is that that can be done in multiple ways, including circumstantially. So laying the foundation through a discussion of, okay, much like a photograph, right? What is this? How do you know this to be a screenshot from this individual? And this is their communication. Talk about the phone number, talk about the context of your understanding of the context of the conversation, specific information that only that person would know, time it was received, all those sorts of steps. Article 9.01 in New York highlights some of that. There's also programs people can purchase if they wish, iCloud for text, Decipher text, but they don't have to go to that route. And we urge our clients, if they don't feel it's safe to do anything now, then to screenshot it in a safe manner and create a me file that they're sharing with a friend or family member, or perhaps an advocacy agency, so they have this information when they want to use it. Our courts in New York have been very receptive with the proper foundation and authentication for it. I want to say as well that the positives of all these methods of communication is that we have so many ways to help our clients now. So I want to just urge you, if you are working with someone who needs this type of assistance, to give us a call, and we would be happy to help and strategize and give them some ideas to move to safety.
Susan, thank you so much. And apropos of what you told us, it's interesting how important it is and things we can learn about helping victims of domestic violence abuse. But one of the things you said that struck me too was that we spend over 23 hours texting. I know that doesn't go to the essential moment of this, but what I'm showing you on the screen is real-time texting, and this is what emojis people are using in real time. So it just kind of puts everything in context. And as you said in your discussion, context matters. So thank you so much for your important thoughts and words. It's my privilege to introduce my final speaker, a student who we are very proud of. I am particularly proud of Ashley Kangro, who is a 3L who came to my office last summer and said that emojis are important, and in her work with the Suffolk DA said we've got to do something, and we did something, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of her for being the motivation behind this. While Pace, she co-authored this article. She is a graduate of University of Connecticut. In a few 19 days, she'll be a graduate of Pace Law School, and she will be working next year as an assistant district attorney for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. Ashley, take it away.
Thank you, Professor Tenzer. My name is Ashley Kangro. I am a 3L here at PACE, and today I wanted to talk about how courts are interpreting emojis. We all know what emojis are. I know I personally use them when communicating with my friends and family regularly. We also know that there are dictionary definitions. For example, a crown can mean a queen, or a pair of heels means just that, a pair of shoes. However, after starting my research, it quickly became apparent to me that emojis that seemed innocuous actually had an entirely different meaning in domestic violence cases. The number of reported cases referencing emojis nearly quadrupled from 2017 to 2020, and courts are increasingly being tasked with interpreting their meaning. And although we think we know the common meaning, it's clear that they can take on an entirely different meaning when it comes to the law. What I've done in the article and Emoji Legal Dictionary is highlight how emojis, when used in the context of violence or civil disputes, can mean something different. These symbols are being used as credible evidence and are important because they can create credible threats, specifically in domestic violence cases. And in my observations, it's important that the emoji is coupled with the context. And in domestic violence cases, it's equally important to look at a past history of abuse. So emojis can have different meanings depending on a variety of factors, like the context of the conversation, the emoji's appearance, and those that are engaged in the emoji-driven conversation. For example, a snowflake can mean snow, or it can mean cocaine. A drop of blood can mean a blood donation, an injury, or menstruation. And the inherent ambiguity, along with their varied appearances across platforms, really poses the risk that judges and juries may misconstrue their meaning. And this shows just how important it is that those that are charged with resolving legal disputes recognize the context in which the conversation is happening, the individual who's sending the message, and the history of those engaged in the conversation. When it comes to domestic violence cases, threats of violence are used as weapons by perpetrators to gain and maintain power over their victims. And advances in technology and the way that we communicate with others give perpetrators more tools to not only threaten their victims, but to continue to threaten them even after they manage to escape. A survey of victim service agencies conducted by the National Network to End Domestic Violence in 2012 found that almost 90% of the 759 agencies reported that victims had been intimidated or threatened by technology. And the immediacy of these new communication methods, including the use of emojis, really reduces the cost and effort required for abusive partners to escalate their actions from mere internal thoughts to verbal threats and physical assaults. And these emotional impulses can now immediately be communicated threats with one simple symbol. Turning to some examples, in 2016, a man sent a text with the gun emoji to his ex-girlfriend, and he was charged with making a death threat. There, the court found that the message contained a death threat in the form of an image and convicted, fined, and sentenced the defendant to 6 months in prison. In another case, the court considered the role of an emoji in a message posted by a man to his ex-partner's Facebook page, which read, "You're going to effing get it," with the airplane emoji. There, the defendant was charged with stalking, and the judge found that the inclusion of the airplane emoji emphasized that the defendant was going to fly to where the victim resided and that he was coming to get her. He was ultimately sentenced to 8 months in prison. Now, although the emoji's meaning can be inconspicuous in other cases, here they were used to amplify the textual context of the message, with the gun and the airplane emoji emphasizing the means by which the threat would be effected or the manner in which the defendant would get to the victim. Now, in these cases, the presence of the emoji expanded on the clear meaning of the message. However, sometimes an emoji's presence can complicate the meaning by introducing uncertainty. For example, in the case Alanis versus the United States, Anthony Alanis threatened his estranged wife with violent lyrics and other posts to his Facebook account. And one of the messages suggested that their son's Halloween costume should include her head impaled on a stick. Now, part of his defense was that the message, which was followed by the tongue out emoticon, was posted in jest. And in their decision, the Supreme Court noted that the rise of social media use has made domestic violence tactics more commonplace. However, they ultimately reversed his conviction due to an erroneous jury instruction on the necessary mens rea to convict. So ultimately, that case was excused on a theory of statutory interpretation, and it left a lot of unanswered questions, namely, what is a true threat? Now, one of the issues with prosecuting such a case is that the statute doesn't specify a defendant's required mental state. For example, it doesn't explicitly state that the defendant must intend for the message to contain a threat. So when emojis are introduced, like in this case, it can actually become more problematic for prosecutors to prove what the defendant intended because of the varying terms or definitions or potential innocent explanations. Now, the Supreme Court did note that the mens rea requirement would be satisfied if the defendant sent the message with the purpose of sending a threat, or if they knew that the communication would be viewed as a threat. And in Justice Thomas's dissent, he noted that threats cannot be determined solely by the reaction of the recipient, but must instead be determined by the interpretation of a reasonable recipient familiar with the context of the communication. And this is especially true for domestic violence cases. The fear and anxiety caused by a threat made by someone that you have a history or a relationship with is not contingent on whether or not they intended to. And even then, the intent behind the statement or the emoji can only be inferred in light of someone that's familiar with the circumstances. Now, there are many contextual factors affecting how words or symbols can be understood. This includes the identity and relationship of the parties, where and how the communication is made. And when it comes to emojis, how they're displayed. Specifically in domestic violence cases, statements made in the context of a relationship marked by a history of abuse are ultimately interpreted not only in light of that history, but while also acknowledging the correlation between threats of violence and the likelihood that these threats will one day be carried out. A study on relationship and context-based stalking found that threats of physical violence are strong indicators of forthcoming physical violence. And a study on verbal threats and other predictors of physical violence found that when verbal threats occurred, the likelihood of violence occurring significantly increased, and that threats of violence were significantly correlated with actual physical violence in every model that they studied. So overall, emojis are being introduced into our court system at a rapid rate. And my research has shown that emojis, when used in the context of threats of violence, can be misinterpreted, and thus shows just how important it is that those charged with resolving legal disputes acknowledge all the factors that can impact an emoji-driven conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. That was very helpful and insightful, and illustrates kind of the increasing role that emoji evidence is going to play in criminal cases. So we do have a couple questions. The first question we have actually talks about this idea of the frog emoji. Now, in our presentations today, we noticed that Karine talked about the idea, floated the idea of using the symbol of a frog as a warning, but Susan said there's this fear that abusers know your every move. And Ashley talked about the way courts wrestle with interpreting emojis. So my question to all three of you, we can start with you, Karine, is how do you know that the symbol of a frog will be universally accepted, but will also be known to those that the victim is trying to avoid?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a normal question, right? So even the Canadian organization that introduced this symbol, this sign, said that that was a question that was asked. So my answer to this is normally domestic people that are abusers, they don't necessarily look for those type of tools or communications, and they don't do research on that from the most part, I might assume. And I think it's better to have that than not having anything. And the frog emoji will not solve everything. Just like this sign is not like, it's not going to end domestic violence, solve everything, but at least it's better to have a sign, a symbol, than having nothing there. So I believe that it's better to have an emoji. And the frog, like I said, is we saw your list of all the emojis, and it's not one that appeared. I didn't see it. It's not used that much. So I think it's less likely to be confused for another message.
Thank you, Susan. Before you answer, I'm going to jump in because someone else asked a question with a similar vein, and their concern is that if we do use the frog as an emoji and it garners press and publicity, is there such a threat to the victims that they may no longer want to use that particular emoji? What do you think, Susan?
Yes, I think for me, I think the thing that works for that client is the best thing we can do for that client. I know there's concern of the advantage of a universal symbol can be terrific in terms of having widespread knowledge, much like the person who is being kidnapped right down south. But we realize that abusers are tracking phones and they are looking at devices. And so sometimes, and I think there was, during the start of COVID, I think there was advice given perhaps in Canada as well, that you could call somebody and order pizza, although you weren't calling the pizza restaurant, and that would clue your friend in that you needed assistance. So when I'm speaking to my clients, and education is power. So any contact we can make with someone and just let them know there are resources out there and connect them with an advocate to safety plan is terrific. So if they have the ability, at the start of COVID, to where they weren't going to work and they weren't leaving the home, but they could walk outside to smoke a cigarette and maybe make a quick phone call, or maybe make, to tell a friend something that, if I call you or if I send this, that will, please come check on me, or please come see if I'm okay. If they had someone trusted to do that, then that would be terrific. So I think you're right. I think there are concerns with any universal symbol, because depending on how informed and crafty that abuser is, we don't ever want to put somebody in a position where they are in harm's way. But what works for that client in the moment when they need the assistance is, for me, the best thing we can do. So just letting them know that there are resources out there and they can make their own symbol even within their own community or contact with a friend.
Great. Ashley, any thoughts on what will happen the first time a frog or something similar appears before a court?
Like Corinne said, many times people are hesitant or scared to reach out for help. It's important that, if we're going to use a universal symbol, it's kind of known to everyone, and these individuals have the opportunity to get help. And then courts will then be tasked to really interpret the meaning based on the context and the relationship.
Great. So going on, we have another, thank you, Ashley. We have another question. Again, Corinne, I'm going to go to you with this one, and then we have a few more. Corinne, speaking about your own personal experience, the question that we're wondering is, how do you think, how can you describe how the fear of your experience affects your daily life and daily decisions? I don't know if that's too personal or something you're willing to share.
Now or the past?
Either. Whatever you're comfortable sharing. Not that I put you on the spot, but
so
sorry.
No, but it's fine. You're helpless and you think you don't have a voice. I don't know. It's like my decision. My goal was to pretend like everything was fine and to leave the house. And I never, ever asked for help because I was too scared that my words would be held against me and that those would then entice additional violence, that I could receive. So for me, that's why this emoji was like, well, I did nothing. I just sent an emoji. Like, there's no words. I didn't accuse anybody. I didn't tell on anybody. And I didn't have to open up so much, because when you open up, it's hard. It's so complex. And, sometimes people are like, but what is wrong with it? Like, for example, I send this to my cousin and like, oh, well, come on. People have different perceptions of things. But if you have that means I need help. And that means call the police. No matter what is going on, I don't need to convince you that it's dangerous enough or that it's, that there's something. So for me, it's this simple and quick thing. I was so scared, pressing on things, long time, calling, shaking. This is harder. It would have been harder for me. So for me, that's why it helps me. And in terms of my daily decisions, I'm just, I have impact of this, those experience. And now I'm with wonderful, my boyfriend, and I'm safe, but I had the bad pattern of going back into bad relationships. Now I know and also now I know the Pace Women's Justice Center exists and is there, and there's hotlines, but at that moment, maybe I was too young to, there's still this gap, and maybe sending this emoji would then help my loved ones to then guide me to an organization like the Pace Women's Justice Center. So that's it.
And that leads me to the next question, which may actually be our last question. And Susan, this question is for you. How, you talk about the idea that people need to have, and Karina and Ashley did too, this idea that you need to have a safe mechanism ahead of time in advance. And even if it's the frog, just set it up in advance. How does people know to kind of create those safe situations before they even get into a situation where they can no longer act freely? Is there a way we can educate people to do something like that?
Well, that's it's a very good question. And that's why I think here at PACE, a lot of our time and focus, in addition to our legal services, is realizing that we need to educate the community and we need to make everybody an ally, because people in need won't, as Corinne said, aren't necessarily thinking, let me call a DV hotline, whether it exists or whether they know it to be a safe choice for them. So we are happy to be part of this Westchester and Putnam and New York State community and building this information out. So we participate in outreach events in libraries and fairs. We join with our partners to spread the word. And we're just trying to let people know, even in high school and middle school on, that if you're in a relationship that's unhealthy, there are things you can do. And that can include on your own, building up a safety network, having one person to confide in, or having a time when you think it's safe to reach out to a support group or call our confidential hotline and our helpline at 422-4673, or a walk-in legal clinic for a consult at 422-4188, or a family court legal program to get an order. And then they'll hopefully, when the moment comes, they'll have that step. And again, I can't stress enough that anytime we seek legal intervention, even if we never seek legal intervention, we're working with our clients to make sure they connect with advocates and they safety plan and they make a path going forward, because the legal piece is just one piece of a safe future. But we realize they need wraparound services to get to a better place.
Thank you. Actually, I am going to do one last question for you. Which emoji surprised you the most?
Wow, there were so many, but I would say the references to prostitution or being a victim or commercially sexually exploited, the crown and the 10 feet on the ground and the money symbol, really, I didn't really expect those to mean what they meant in those cases.
I agree. I thought the money, the feet was kind of crazy. Well, I'm going to throw this back to Cindy in just a moment. Before I do, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to hear what we think is really important and for joining us. Again, thanks to the Pace Women's Justice Center, Jana and Patty and everyone who helped us. Cindy.
Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Professor Tenzer, Ashley, Karin, and Susan, for this really interesting conversation, very eye-opening. I think it's something that clearly, based upon the, our technology use, we're going to be talking about well into the future. Thank you for bringing it to all of our attention. We will be sending a link to the article, the law review article, to everyone so you can read it and learn more. I'm sure it's an incredibly fascinating article, and I look forward to reading it as well. And we'll also be sending out information about resources available in the community for survivors of domestic violence. So thank you all again for joining us, and have a good day. Bye.